at every turn where I wondered, where is God? Or where I wanted to cry out like the psalmist and lament, I would find God in the faces of my incredibly devout and faithful students, whether they were Muslim or Christian or Jewish or Hindu or Sikh, that would come and pray with me. And I just think in the toughest moments, I see God walking with and weeping alongside us and giving us the strength to keep moving forward and to find beauty.
On In Good Faith, we believe that all faith traditions have something to teach us about how God is working in the world and in our lives. So join us as we listen and learn. If you're a fan of superhero movies, then you are probably never surprised that the fate of the universe seems to be hanging on the actions of our heroes. They're always literally saving the world, or sometimes time or existence. Have you ever imagined what it would feel like to think you were responsible for saving the world? Because I did not know this, but many people with OCD or Obsessive Compulsive Disorder actually feel compelled to act out their intrusive thoughts and obsessions with a sense that they are saving someone they love, their whole family, and as we'll hear from today's guests, maybe even the entire city of Atlanta. That's a lot of responsibility and stress, especially when it's not actually connected to reality. Today, we're introducing a little mini-series on spirituality and neurodivergence, and I'm so excited for us to learn today from Katie O'Dunn. Reverend Dr. Katie O'Dunn founded and leads an inclusive virtual community for those navigating faith and OCD called Stick with the Ick. An ordained minister in the United Church of Christ, she's consulted on interfaith programming nationwide, and she's also the proud recipient of the Award for Distinction in Integrative Care Practices from Vanderbilt's Doctor of Ministry program.
OCD is not the cute quirk that we often see in movies, and it's often misrepresented in media. It's really a challenging disorder that's marked by obsessions and compulsions. And obsessions are really intrusions that come up for someone around the things that are the most important to them. It's a series of what-if questions about the things that they care about most. And the compulsions are the things that they're doing to alleviate the fear, the guilt, the shame, the doubt around those what-ifs.
It's not just that it's an irritating habit, it's that it seems to satisfy some need.
And the interesting thing, which we'll get into, the reason people engage in compulsions is typically the first time they do them, they go, okay, I feel safe from this intrusive thought or from this obsession. But it really doesn't work because over time, the obsession comes back or it comes back stronger and they go back into what we call the OCD cycle or the OCD loop. And for so many people, it really does start early on. Some of my first memories were touching things in a particular order to try to keep everyone in the world safe, which seems incredibly extreme, but often OCD fears are not necessarily logical, but for the person, they seem real and intense. And I had an elementary school teacher tell me that the sun would eventually get too close to the earth and everyone would die. And I somehow associated if I did everything right, I could keep everyone on the planet safe. And that was a lot of pressure for an elementary schooler.
Well, let me just say we appreciate your efforts in our behalf.
Thank you. I appreciate that. So I moved through life. My parents found treatment for me at one point that wasn't the effective treatment for OCD. And even at an early age, I think I was about 8 at that point, I actually pretended to get better because I wanted my psychologist to feel like he was good at his job. Also very much defined by my OCD. So I said, oh, I feel better. I'm not having this issue anymore. And really masked a lot of the symptoms that I was experiencing. And the very lengthy story short is I got into seminary. And by the time I was moving through my Master of Divinity at Candler School of Theology, which is what brought me to Atlanta, my OCD was really bad. And it was to the point that I wasn't sleeping. I was driving back to churches and spaces in Atlanta to make sure candles were blown out and doors were locked to make sure everyone was safe. And I went to a mentor at the time and said, I think I actually have OCD because of a course I had taken that I recognized it. And at the time, I was told not to seek treatment because I wouldn't pass my ordination interviews or
Oh,
no one would
yeah.
respect me in ministry. So at the time, I actually didn't get help. I studied ways to get around OCD on my psych evaluations. And I just felt an extreme amount of shame for being neurodivergent in ministry and felt like, well, no one can know if I want to be a successful minister.
You said something that actually really touched me. You said that often the compulsions or the obsessions form around things that are very important to us. And one thing that's important, because you're in ministry,
Mhm.
you care about people.
Yeah.
And so you did end up trying to save the world.
Mhm.
And so, as difficult as that was, I'm really sorry that you went through that. But I'm touched that it centered around something that is so good, which is your care for people.
I appreciate that. And I think that becomes the really tricky thing with OCD is I've seen so many different cases where it latches on to, again, whatever's significant to someone. So it can be their love of people, their love of their child. It can be their love of God. And it takes something that's really pure and really beautiful and ultimately removes the person from the thing that they love so much
Mm.
because the compulsions ultimately take someone away from actually engaging with their child or with God or with those around them and can leave them confined to their room to keep everyone safe when the actual way to engage with those you love would be to be with them.
Your organization is called Stick with the Ick. So tell me about that. It's very memorable.
In terms of kind of how we got there, I ended up my first major role in educational chaplaincy. My OCD still wasn't treated at this point and got incredibly challenging. I was the front line for grief, trauma, and loss for 2,700 amazing families from different faith backgrounds. And my OCD, as someone who cared so deeply, latched on to everything. And I started to blame myself for anything bad that happened in the community, for anything bad that happened in Atlanta. And I ultimately hit a really low point and ended up being able to seek treatment. And I feel very fortunate because I know that isn't the case for everyone. And I had the means and the resources and the support to seek exposure and response prevention, which is considered the gold standard treatment for OCD. And I got better. And for the first time, I actually felt connected to the things around me. I felt like I was able to be present and live my life. And I didn't want to be quiet about it anymore. So actually started sharing publicly as a school chaplain. And I was really scared that I actually would get fired or that no one would respect me as a minister. And it was the opposite. I started hearing from my students, "Oh, Chaplain K, can you talk to my rabbi or my priest or my imam or my pastor? And how can I talk with them about my mental health? How can I get treatment?" And this ultimately led me to a whole world of OCD advocacy in areas that I didn't know existed at the time and into scrupulosity that we'll get into a little bit today. But Stick with the Ick really comes out of that treatment that I advocate for and out of the treatment that saved my life. Because exposure response prevention is around this idea that we're engaging in things that are really hard in order to bring up those intrusions or obsessions. And then we're practicing not doing the compulsions. We're doing response prevention. And in order for that to be effective, we actually have to stick with the really icky stuff. We have to intentionally bring it on and let it be there and say, "Oh, I'm going to let all of the icky stuff be there, not going to get rid of it, not going to engage in compulsions in favor of stepping forward with my life, with my faith, and with my values." So I boil it down and say, we're going to stick with the ick.
Let's tie this with faith a little bit. And I wonder, just as you've worked with different people as a chaplain, on a different range of neurodiversities, what do you see as strengths or challenges in a faith life?
My full work is around OCD and scrupulosity, which is actually really entirely related to someone's faith or
Hmm.
morality. And scrupulosity, we say, is kind of a facet of obsessive compulsive disorder, where all of the obsessions and compulsions actually relate to their faith.
Hmm.
So all of those what if questions have to do with, well, what if I did something wrong? What if God's mad at me? What if I sinned? What if I'm not good enough? What if I didn't ritually wash enough times? What if I didn't follow that dietary restriction perfectly?
Yeah.
But it goes beyond normative practice in the community. And then the compulsions can often look like someone is incredibly devout, when the reality is they're doing those things over and over and over again in response to the obsession in a way that feeds the OCD. So it can look like someone praying 100 times a day, trying to get it just right, or washing again and again, or going and confessing to their minister or to God over and over. And the challenge for someone with scrupulosity, even though it can look like they're incredibly devout, is these practices, it actually moves them away from their faith. And I often say it's almost like they're worshiping OCD instead of the divine, because it's from a space of fear and guilt and shame and anxiety dictated by the disorder. They have this heightened sense of responsibility, like I did throughout my entire life, but towards God. Now, I think the flip side, which we can talk about through treatment, I actually see folks with OCD get closer to God in really amazing, awesome ways.
I was going to ask if having those sorts of worries keeps people from feeling something as simple as God cares about me or God loves me.
Yeah, it's incredibly, incredibly sad. We have a support group this evening. I run a lot of different interfaith groups for folks who navigate, and our primary topic relates to people thinking that God loves everyone else except for them, that they are not worthy of God's love or God's forgiveness, and that they have to be perfect in order to be enough for God. And it's really sad because these are incredible people who can look at anyone else in the world and see, oh, this person is a wonderful child of God, but they have so much trouble looking in the mirror and seeing that for themselves. And at the simplest level, it just separates them from actually feeling the love of God that's there the entire time.
So as you started to heal or be able to learn how to direct or deal with those feelings, did you discover, even though you were in ministry, did you find new spiritual gifts?
Absolutely. And it's one of the reasons that I started to kind of dive into and work in this area. In moving through treatment and in healing, I recognized there was so much grief from what I had experienced. And I felt like there were so many things in my life that were, I always say, kind of shattered on the floor. And also at the same time, through faith, I felt like those pieces were put back together in a way that was even more beautiful than it was to begin with. And life wasn't what it was before, but it was even better because of all of the things that I learned. I actually see people connect with God in ways that are authentic to them. I see them learn, because of the leaps of faith that they take in treatment, to fully surrender, to find beauty in brokenness, and to have just a really beautiful view of what it means to connect with the divine. And that's what happened with me. And so much, probably the greatest gift of doing this work is seeing that with individuals every day that are so scared. I often hear, if I get treatment and I'm not doing these compulsions, what if that means that I'm no longer going to connect with God? And it's actually the opposite. I see people connect with God as they move through and heal in just really profound ways.
You made me think of a blind man in the New Testament. His name was Bartimaeus, begging by the side of the road in Jericho. And here's that Jesus was passing by with a crowd of people. So he cries out, "Jesus, thou son of David, have mercy on me." And it says everyone told him, "Hold your peace," like, don't bother Jesus. But it says he cried out more and a great deal, "Have mercy on me." And so Jesus hears him, comes over to him, and heals him. So it's sad to me that people said, don't bother Jesus, keeping Bartimaeus from God and healing. But I think it's even more tragic, like you've been talking about, if people in need are kept from God and healing by themselves because they don't understand how their compulsion works. They don't reach out for help, not knowing that that is the necessary first step. And of course, that doesn't just apply to OCD, but lots of different areas of life. You mentioned connecting with faith, with God, or even just any moral system. So this seems to be a common variation in humanity. So does it manifest differently if you're Christian or Muslim or Hindu or raised with no particular faith? Or is it just there in a certain percentage of every population?
That is such a great question. We are actually starting a research study on this right now because there isn't enough research on this. The cause of OCD is still unknown. There is some debate in this area, but it's often believed that individuals are predisposed to have OCD, that there's something genetic. And then it's also exacerbated by your environment. And I don't see it coming up more often in the Christian tradition or the Jewish tradition or the Hindu tradition or the Muslim tradition. I work on cases around the world across faith traditions that people are in profound pain from this disorder.
Yeah.
It just manifests differently based on the environment that they're a part of and what's really important to them.
You're listening to In Good Faith. We'll be back in just a moment. You know, there are no perfect people, and there are no perfect families, and no perfect relationships. So how do we be good people and have good relationships and good families? How do we do better at what is most important to us? I'm here to tell you about The Lisa Show, another in the family of BYU radio podcasts. Lisa Valentine Clark is a comedian, a believer, a single mother. She delves into the challenges and the relationships that shape all of our lives, whether we're talking about parenting, mental health questions, social issues, being a caregiver. She and her council of moms tackle the topic. Yes, you'll hear from experts, but you'll also hear from the people who have been digging the trenches. She'll help you figure out this thing called life with lots of laughs along the way. It's The Lisa Show. Listen wherever you get your podcasts. Welcome back to In Good Faith. I'm speaking with Reverend Dr. Katie O'Dunn of Stick with the Ick.
I grew up as a runner. I was a Division I runner and have been a competitive athlete for a long time. The other phrase in the community that I use besides stick with the ick is running towards your values. And I always say that no matter how you're feeling or the thoughts that you're having, we have this really beautiful choice in faith to continue moving toward everything that's meaningful to us. And I always say for me that I don't just move in that direction. I try to run and leap in that direction.
Do you feel like there was a plan? That you're called to this by your circumstances or whatever God had in mind?
Yeah, very much so. And I think for me, there's a lot of purpose in looking back at really painful moments and knowing that, gosh, I think I always say I don't have all the answers. I don't know all the whys, and that's okay. But I do believe that God has been with me every step of the way and has given me an amazing, beautiful opportunity to find beauty in brokenness. And I have so much gratitude for that. I look back, and as recent as 2017 or 2018, I didn't know how I was going to get out of bed or step forward. And to be in a space now where I love my life and I have the incredible blessing of getting to work with so many amazing folks across faith traditions who struggle with exactly what I did and help them find faith in the midst of that is just the biggest gift. And I wouldn't trade it for the world. And I'm so thankful every day to God for that. I really am.
How do you perceive direction or a nudge or an answer, a direct answer to a prayer? How does that come to you? How do you recognize that?
I actually probably think about this pretty often because I get this question from folks with OCD of how do I know that I'm not supposed to do this thing as a sign from God or that I am supposed to do this thing, which actually can be in the form of an obsession. And I often, in separating the voice of God from the voice of OCD, things from an OCD space often move with urgency and move quickly and move with fear. And it feels like I have to get this thing right now, or something bad's going to happen. And God answering or nudging us moves from a space of meaning and connection and hope and the hold of a hand and a hug. And that's really what I have felt on the sides of my journey that have been directed by faith in God and not by OCD. This really slow, comfortable, beautiful movement toward everything that was meaningful to me that I couldn't have expected. And I think about if I had moved through a lot of these things with urgency or said, oh, I have to get this right and I have to make meaning out of this right now and I have to create this, that isn't the way that God moves with us. And I think following where we find meaning and hope and community and that calm breath is really how I try to move in following God.
It's probably not really helpful if we stop to just straighten things and then people see us and people joke and say, oh, sorry, it's just my OCD, because that's not what it is. I remember driving with my mom as a teenager along the highway. She was driving, and I noticed she was moving her head in a certain way, like this pattern of circles. So I said, "What are you doing?" And she sort of laughed and said, "I'm just doing my pattern between telephone poles." It's embarrassing, but in my mind, I do an arc and then a loop halfway between that comes back down to the next telephone pole. So I said, "Can you stop doing that if you want?" She said, "Yeah, if I think about it." But just unconsciously, if I'm not paying attention, I fall into doing that. So I think many of us have little patterns, whether or not we step on sidewalk cracks or whether we do equal numbers of steps between parking lot lines or if we organize our socks by colors, but we can stop those actions if we want. It doesn't take over our lives, and we don't feel that there are horrific consequences if we stop. So that's not OCD.
No. And this is one of the biggest things that we talk about, that when we see something portrayed in the media in that way, or when someone says, "Oh, I just like to organize my pens," or "I like to do this," that it might seem like such a small thing, but it does a couple of things. It minimizes the disorder. It prevents individuals from getting diagnosed and treated because they don't often recognize really what it is. And it really perpetuates a stereotype of something that the disorder's not. Your compulsions are never going to be about something that you like or that you enjoy. It's actually something that's painful for someone. So I used to find it so painful when I would be at work and someone would say, "Oh, I love straightening my car. I have OCD too." And I would think, I just spent 8 hours doing this thing that was so painful for me that I didn't want to do. It's not something that I like.
So what can we do in faith communities to be more aware and maybe more helpful to people who have OCD or scrupulosity in particular?
There are so many amazing ways that faith communities can help, because faith leaders in particular actually are often the first person that someone with scrupulosity goes to. Because they'll say, "I have all of these questions," or "I want to confess this thing to you." So I think the more education that we can do both in congregations and with faith leaders, the better. That's part of with Stick with the Ick. We just came out with a new course for clergy that lets clergy know how can we recognize OCD in our various faith communities, but then also how can we offer support without offering reassurance. And I think this is a key point for folks in their communities to know. If someone has OCD or you suspect they have OCD or they're moving through treatment, reassurance is actually never helpful. If they're continuing to ask the same question over and over and you're saying, "Oh, it's going to be okay and God loves you and it's completely fine." I know that's what we want to do as congregants or as ministers. But unfortunately, that actually serves as a compulsion and it puts the person back in the cycle and it makes the obsession stronger. So I always say an alternative in a faith community, if someone is asking the same question again and again from a space of OCD, is to say, "I think you have asked this question before, and I think you're asking from a space of anxiety. I know that this is not going to be helpful to you on your treatment journey right now, but I am more than happy to sit with you in the midst of the uncertainty and the discomfort and these tough emotions because I really care about you and want you to get better."
I wonder if do people sometimes have a hard time recognizing it in themselves?
Absolutely. So actually, OCD as a whole, on average, it takes someone 17 years to get diagnosed with OCD. In working in scrupulosity, it's been fascinating to me training clergy and going to different spaces where typically as soon as I do a training, someone will say, "Wow, there are 4 folks in my congregation who have been doing all of these things and I had no idea. And I feel so bad because I've been giving them reassurance for 5 years and we didn't know." And it's interesting because it's something we don't learn necessarily as clergy in seminary. And yet faith leaders can play such a significant role in recognizing and helping someone seek support, but also seek the correct evidence-based treatment like exposure and response prevention. I guess the piece that I always like to highlight is scrupulosity. It's not a faith concern. It's not a lack of faith. It's a mental health disorder that's latching on to something really, really important to you. And also by engaging in treatment, it doesn't mean that you're moving away from faith. You're actually taking a leap of faith.
I would love someone with your experience and expertise in every theological seminary training people. But it seems like that's something that if someone wants more information or might tell their spiritual leader, they could simply go to stickwithick.com for
Yeah.
scrupulosity, or there are other ways to get ongoing training. I'm wondering if you can put your finger on why you believe.
There have been so many moments throughout my life, and I was raised in the Episcopal Church, and that was always a cornerstone of my life. But actually in college, I was there primarily to run cross country, and that was what I cared about as I headed in. My first week there, broke my foot. And I ended up coming back and, having a wonderful couple last seasons, but it led to a really beautiful experience where I got to work with a group of foster kids in the area who were running cross country. And I remember feeling this hug and this breath and moving toward that experience in the midst of something really hard. And pieces started to come together for me where I was asked to preach at a church for the first time. And I remember standing up there and feeling again this deep breath of God is here and this is where I'm supposed to be. And I think those moments for me throughout my life, in every hard instance, I had a series of really difficult losses while working in school chaplaincy of individuals to their own mental health struggles that were incredibly challenging for me. And at every turn where I wondered, where is God? Or where I wanted to cry out like the psalmist and lament, I would find God in the faces of my incredibly devout and faithful students, whether they were Muslim or Christian or Jewish or Hindu or Sikh, that would come and pray with me, or that would light up as they talked about their spiritual practices. And I just think again and again, in the toughest moments, I see God really as walking with and weeping alongside us and giving us the strength to keep moving forward and to find beauty.
Thanks to Reverend Dr. Katie O'Dunn for sharing with us so vulnerably and helping us understand a little bit the experience of those among us with OCD. This episode was produced by Aaliyah Ebert. Our production team includes Heather Bigley, Katerina Martinich, Soraya Pearson, and James Sturdivant. Our post-production team includes DJ Cromarty, Gracie Davis, and Mark Hansen. Spread the word about In Good Faith by leaving a comment and subscribing wherever you get your podcasts. In Good Faith is committed to the idea that we all benefit from hearing people of widely varying backgrounds share their personal experience with faith and belief. We think people with such experience deserve some of our best listening. Find us on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. Our YouTube page is youtube.com/in-good-faith. In Good Faith is a production of BYU Radio. I'm Stephen Cap Perry. I hope you join us again soon, right here in Good Faith.